Hi, welcome to the Day Palmer Show. And today I have with me the founder and president of the United Nations affiliated ISRC. And he's also the survivor of two near-death experiences. David Dodd, welcome to the Day Palmer Show.
Hi, Dave. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty short introduction for you, but actually you've been through quite a lot, really. So I'd like to really get the audience before we telling what you actually do, where you founded the International Sustainable Resilience Centre and the work you do and how it can help people today. Let's hear your story first about how everything began with you. I mean, obviously your career, I think, started off as a banker in Louisiana hometown. Tell us what the story from there.
Yeah, I grew up in a tiny town, 1,800 people.
Right,
in northwest Louisiana, right on the Texas border. My accent's not a typical Louisiana accent.
All right, okay. Mine's a typical London accent.
Yeah, well, I enjoy that. I enjoy that a lot. Anyway, so I grew up there. My parents were 44 when I was born, and I'm 60. So we talk about resilience. I learned resilience through their example. Some people have that. Are fortunate to do that, and some need to learn it on their own. But I was shown that through the resilience of my parents going through the Great Depression, World War II.
All right, Great Depression, yeah.
My dad went into a partnership, and his partner mismanaged the business, and they lost everything right after I was born. I had to start all over at 44 years old.
That's almost like starting from the ground up, as in literally on the ground. Your life, literally. Everything.
They sold everything they had and moved from Northwest Arkansas down to Northwest Louisiana in East Texas. My dad's business was actually in Texas. He rebuilt his business. He started out working for someone else and then went back out on his own with no partner this time. And he and my mom worked together and rebuilt the business. And so they showed me what it was to be resilient and how you can bounce back. And then I, as you said, I went to college, went into banking, and started doing economic development in this small town. And I fell in love with economic development, giving people opportunity, creating jobs, bringing investment. So I went into economic development, took a big pay cut, and started over when I was 29.
Right. Okay.
And then went into consultancy when I was 34. And that same year, that was the beginning of the year, the end of the year, I had a horrific automobile accident, had an adverse reaction to medication, and I passed out the wheel, going about 65 miles an hour. I hit a Suburban. I was in a sports car, and I hit a Suburban.
You was driving?
I was driving, but I was out.
Yeah.
Witnesses saw me pass out. Over the field.
Yeah.
And injured one other person, but not seriously. Gave a person in that Suburban a concussion. They were thrown out of the vehicle. But my car literally ended up, it hit a telephone pole, and the impact of the Suburban caused it to go airborne, and it hit a telephone pole and came down in the parking lot of a funeral home, which was pretty appropriate because I was clinically dead at that point.
Oh, wow.
So, someone that's never been identified revived me, and the ambulance was supposed to be 11 minutes away because it was coming back from another run. It was 3 minutes away. They said that makes a difference. I wouldn't have survived. I lost 6 pints of blood. I had 17 broken bones. My hip was destroyed. I had to have an artificial hip replacement. And they told my family when they brought me in that I probably wouldn't make it through the night. And I made it through the night. And then they said, well, he'll never walk again. 3 months later, I walked out of the hospital with assistance, with a walker. So then I continued in economic development consulting, and fast forward to 2005, and I had worked to bring continuing education and professional development in the economic development field of Mexico. And I was in Ensenada on the West Coast, and I walked into my hotel, and they had a satellite monitor that allowed you to look at various parts of the earth. And it happened to be over North and Central America, the Gulf of Mexico. And I looked down, and there's this monster called Katrina taking up what looked like the entire Gulf of Mexico.
Wow, I remember that.
And I said, oh my God. I emailed my friend who was the Secretary of Economic Development for the state of Louisiana. And I said, this looks really bad. What can I do to help? 2 days later, he sent an email back, a 5-word email: get your bleep to Baton Rouge, which is the capital of the state of Louisiana.
Yeah.
Oh, that marked the beginning of a turn in the trajectory of my career, from economic development to what I do now, strictly economic recovery and economic resilience.
Yeah.
So we held a summit that I directed in Washington, the 4 affected states and congressional and cabinet level leaders from the U.S. government. And, that was a high profile event. So I started to get calls from different places around the world. I had an international practice in economic development. So I ended up, working in Australia, working in Mexico, doing some remote support for the Philippines, where I think you are now. And then in 2010, I was asked to go to Japan to help them recover from the Fukushima earthquake and tsunami. And Dave, Katrina was horrendous, but I've never seen anything like the destruction in Japan. There were entire cities washed into the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
Nothing left. But through that, I learned a lot about resilience through example again, as I did in my youth. I was again resilience of the Japanese people, which was incredible. And then flash forward again to 2019, and I'm working in Puerto Rico to help them recover from hurricanes Irma and Maria and subsequent earthquakes. And I inadvertently got a deadly bacteria in my bloodstream, wound in my foot.
What was your symptoms? What happened there?
Well, it was strange because this is again how these things can overlap. I had from my auto accident, I had what they call drop foot. I had nerve damage that caused my foot to drop. I couldn't pick the foot itself up. I could pick my leg up, but the foot is, when you step, you pick your foot up. I couldn't do that. So I had problems with that foot all the time, and I fell frequently because it would drag on the floor and cause me to fall. So that foot started hurting, but I didn't think anything about it because it hurt. And I became sick. I became ill. And I was running a low grade fever. I didn't take my temperature. I could just tell I was running a fever.
Yeah.
I thought I was coming down with the flu or something like that. Well, the next day I had already made arrangements to come home for a couple of days to New Orleans, and where I am now. And I got home and I didn't feel good, but I didn't feel any worse. And the next morning I woke up and I looked down at my leg, and there were big red shoots coming up my leg. So this was a mutation of salmonella. This is the 7th case of this particular mutation ever reported.
Oh, I see. You're right.
And I went to the hospital, and they came in, they did a sample, and they came in and they were all ashen, and they said, we have to operate on you right now to save your life. And I said, where do I sign? What choice do you have? And they amputated my left leg above the knee. They were able to leave enough residual that I'm able to walk with a prosthetic, and I have an artificial knee that's actually a microprocessor that remembers how I step. So there are positives to every bad thing, but I went through a very, very close to death experience there. I had to be resuscitated 3 times. And again, the residual from one from one incident to another that often we don't think about. I had scar tissue in my throat because when I had the auto accident, I had a tracheotomy,
Oh, right.
and
Yeah.
it caused scar tissue, and that scar tissue was blocking my getting enough
Your
oxygen
airway. Yeah.
to be able to survive this amputation. And so I barely made it. And I came out of that with a stark realization. I've been left here not once but twice, and I'd better get busy. I mean, I was already working hard, but I said I'm doubling down, and I immediately picked up. I had been planning a big event here in New Orleans for my United Nations colleagues, and I doubled down on that. I made that a much bigger event than it originally had been planned for, and moved it from, it was going to be in October, and we moved it to March of 2020. So it was the first week of March. Well, you remember what happened to the world the second week of March and third, the lockdown.
Yeah.
And but before that week before that first week of March, we had an incredible event, and it really changed the trajectory of my work. I still do disaster recovery under contract with the United States Economic Development Administration. And I'm working right now. I'm still working in Puerto Rico remotely, but I also stood up this center in a realistic way. It had been kind of sitting around since 2017. I hadn't done that much. Well, I brought on a staff, and now we're doing great projects around the world. And it all goes back to what have you learned, what can you establish as far as principles that you're going to follow, and then taking action to implement those principles. And that's true of almost anything in life, and it's certainly true of personal resilience.
Yeah. Well, I know. Also, just before you had that incident with the deadly poison or salmonella, you did actually. I mean, with your lifetime theme of resilience, you did actually start the organisation International Sustainable Resilience Centre. Tell us how that got started.
That it's an interesting story. That started in Japan.
All
I was
right.
in, I was introduced to an official from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe who had 2 years prior established a center of excellence in public-private partnerships. And the way they did this was a hub and spoke approach. So the ICOE, as we call it, is the hub. It's based in Geneva, but the spokes are specialist centers of excellence in all types of areas, in water and in sanitation, in policy and laws, in ports and maritime transportation, in road and rail transportation, and in building capacity for local governments. So these centers are all around the world. There are 8 of them, and I had met this gentleman who runs the center and the international center, the umbrella organization, and he and I became fast friends. And he put me on what they call a team of specialists, where it's like an advisory committee to the center. And a couple of years later, I approached him with the idea of creating a specialist center in disaster resilience and recovery. And he fully embraced it, as did the other centers. And in 2017, we were formally approved. And my center was fairly nascent for the first couple of years. But after I was elected president of all the centers in May of 2019, they had planned an event in October, and after the incident with my amputation, moved it to March of 2020, and had a fabulous experience there. Because I made a commitment. I'm going to double down. I'm going to keep doing, and I do to this day, disaster recovery support, but I'm also going to build this center. And so we did that. We had this event in March, the first week of March. The second week of March, the lockdown occurred, and that's when I really started pulling everything together and have this staff that's wonderful. anyway, that's the story of my own experience, my own brush with death, and ability to come back. And everyone has a story, Dave.
Yeah.
Uh, you have one. Everyone has a story. If you're an adult and you've lived a few years as an adult, something's happened to you, and it may be something that you don't like to talk about. It may be something that
Yeah.
is deeply personal. That's fine. You don't have to tell the world, but you do need to deal with it. You need to be able to, again, bounce back from whatever setback that was, and that's the same with communities. And if you as a community, if you haven't learned uh, how to be able to do that, you can learn that. There are many sources of information and education on community resilience, and every community needs to know, even if they don't think they'll ever be hit by disasters. I hear from your British accent that
Yeah.
you're from somewhere in the UK, and,
Yeah. Well, very
and
obvious London accent I have, so
yeah.
but
Well,
presentable.
yeah. Well, a hurricane, the remnants of a hurricane, it was a tropical storm at the time, hit the south coast of England
Yeah,
and
that's
another
right. Yeah.
Ireland. That never happened before.
No, that's right. I think
And
that was
the
more.
reason, I mean, that's obvious proof that the climate is changing. You can
Yeah,
argue
that's
all
right.
day
Yeah.
whether it's man-made or it's a natural cycle. I don't get into that.
No,
All
no.
I know, climate is changing,
Yeah.
and I leave it to people much smarter than me to take action to stop climate change, or you can't stop it. That's the whole point. But to try to remedy the rate at which it's changing. My job is one thing: it's adapting to what is really happening and will happen, and it's going to continue to change. If we stopped all carbon output right now, just by throwing a switch, the climate will continue to change for many decades to come because of what's already out there. And
Right.
if you give us a natural process, then the natural process is going to play out over many decades. So my job and my quest, my passion is adaptation, taking steps to adapt and be able to withstand these incidents that are going to occur. Now, you add on top of weather, you add things like pandemics, which we all
Yeah.
been made acutely aware of this year, and you add acts of terrorism. You add man-made disasters such as oil spills and other calamities, nuclear incidents. And all of those require that you adapt and learn to be resilient. So my quest is to tell the world, my story and how that relates to personal resilience, community resilience, and national resilience,
You're right.
because they're all interconnected.
Yeah. But what's the connection then between those?
The connection is suffering a hardship, suffering, and again, an adverse incident, and being able to bounce back from that, being able
Right.
to
Yeah.
recover from that, and then being able to use that recovery to increase the resilience of yourself, your community, your country, the planet. And there are three connecting mutual parts to that. And the first is knowledge, gaining knowledge, learning.
Yeah.
Some can learn through the example of people around them, but you also need to do some active learning. And then from that, you develop principles, and those principles, of resilience, include things like being prepared. I mean, you're in the Philippines right now, Dave. Do you
Yeah.
have 5 to 7 days of fresh drinking water and 5 to 7 days of canned or dry food in case something
Um,
happens?
we've got a store in the front of the house, so we've got some canned food, and they make distilled water here because the water from the tap isn't good to drink. And we said, well, we have a good supply. I would say we've got 7 days, or at least 5 anyway.
Well, you'd be shocked at the number of people that don't.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's right.
And even more shocked at the number of people that are in areas that have had incidents that don't. And it's not that difficult. I mean, that's just one example. So taking action is the third step, and the action is either doing, again, things to make yourself more resilient. That's number one, because you can't help others be more resilient and can't help others in the event of an incident unless you yourself are resilient. But also reaching out into your neighborhood.
Yeah,
And someone asked me once, what's the most important aspect of community resilience? And I said, it's one thing and one thing only. It's relationships. It's
yeah,
connection.
yeah,
It's being connected to the people around you. Making the effort to get to know the people around you and know who they are, what their needs may be. Again, I'm able to walk, but not without assistance, and I spend a bit of my time in a wheelchair, and my neighbors all know that because I've made the effort to meet them, and they've made the effort to meet me. But I'm assuming you already know this, and most people probably know this. The majority of people, especially in cities, don't know people in the next block. They may know their
yeah. I
next
know.
door,
Yeah,
but
it can
not
be like that in
more than
London.
that.
Any fast, real
Yeah,
big, like New York's the same. Like big, fast cities, like that. Probably even Tokyo could be like that, and you know, big global cities so fast.
absolutely, absolutely.
All you're doing is
But
going to work, coming home late, and you don't see anyone.
right, but also people in the suburbs.
Yeah. Okay.
I lived in a suburb of a mid-sized city for 10 years, and I never knew the people next door. I never met the people next door.
Yeah.
And that's a lesson, because if you want resilience, you have to form relationships. They
Yeah.
go hand in glove. And the other really important thing is to know and support investments that make communities more resilient. If you're in a flood prone area, you need a flood protection system.
Right.
Now, you don't have to pay for that directly, but being aware of the need and lobbying for change, lobbying for that to happen, supporting those types of investments. And they don't all have to be public sector. Public-private partnerships for resilience is what my center is all about.
Right.
And the private sector is fast realizing that there is a return on investment for resilience enhancing projects in communities in which they are located. Their companies are located, and that's through reduction in damages. So there are models now that are very sophisticated that can predict the odds of a particular event happening in a particular location within a given period of time. In my home state of Louisiana in the U.S., they've done a predictive model, and they said that there is a 27% chance that Louisiana will experience another. We experienced a 500-year flooding events within a year in 2017.
Yeah.
2016. And they said that there's a 27% probability that that will happen again within the next 30 years. So if you say, okay, there's almost a third, a 1/3 chance that Louisiana is going to be hit with a 500-year flood. If
Wow.
we invest in adaptation, through raising homes in certain areas, through building flood protection systems and levees to protect vulnerable areas, then there's going to be a return, uh, uh, assuming this happens again within the next 30 years, in terms of reduction of damages. And there are these models that can calculate that. So, and my center's been involved in that and developing some of those models. So, again, investing yourself, your effort, your time your energy in helping your community, helping your province or your state or your country become more resilient is the same thing. That's an investment that will provide a return to you, either directly or indirectly, when disaster strikes.
Right, I see. Well, let's go into one last thing before we round up the show. I know we mentioned earlier about the pandemic and adaptation, but let's bring things up to date and relevant to what's going on now. I know the main topic of resilience is COVID-19. So how could the ongoing resilience of COVID-19, how can how is adaptation the key to dealing with future global adverse events?
And that's the key word that you said there was future,
Right.
because every medical scientist that I've ever seen says there will be another pandemic. There have been
Yeah, that's right.
pandemics before, but they never reached a global scale and never spread as fast as this one.
Even
And
Even Bill Gates is saying that, and he's not a scientist.
right, exactly. He's
Yeah.
a smart guy, but he's
Yeah.
not a scientist. But yeah, that's the consensus. So we have to continue the adaptations that we've undergone, and we have to be ready uh, for the next wave of pandemic, whether it's COVID-19 or something else. And that's going to require systemic change. The changes that we've had to make for COVID-19, some of those need to be continued. And I think that we're going to see much more. One of the things that this is a very important point, Dave, is
Yeah.
one of the things that my center is undertaking is an effort through public-private partnerships to increase broadband capacity, especially in developing nations, and to show businesses in particular how to become digital, how to use broadband for their own business efforts, whether it's a small retail shop or a professional services organization or a manufacturer, because that is a trend that was greatly exponentially. It was a trend already, but it was exponentially increased by the pandemic. And I think one of the things that's going to continue with us is this revolution in how business is done, from in person to over broadband. And I think that's going to stay with us. And again, if there's another pandemic, we'll certainly need that. So, resilience can take many forms. Sometimes things that you don't, well, what does broadband have to do with resilience? Well, in the pandemic, it has everything to do with resilience. So that adaptation is constant. It changes. It continually, there are new things added to the definition of resilience, and now broadband accessibility and broadband knowledge of how to use broadband has been added to resilience, and it will be forever.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, I see you've not only the CEO of the United Nations affiliated ISRC Centre, but also you've been a president and emeritus of the International PP Centre of Excellence Specialist Centres, Louisiana Tech University alumni, State University alumni, University of Oklahoma alumni, and a former dean of, I mean, a dean's quite, that's the highest of the academic institution, but that you work in, but of the OU Economic Development Institute. So you've done quite a lot, well, not, yeah, I suppose, with these organizations and academic institution, haven't you?
Yes, and that's another very important point, Dave, is lifetime learning. You don't stop when you graduate from
Yeah.
college. I went to an executive program in banking at Louisiana State University after graduating from Louisiana Tech University.
Yeah.
And then, as you say, University of Oklahoma, where I was educated in economic development, also began to teach and became part of the faculty of that institute, and then became the dean of that institute, and then took that institute to Mexico. Those are all things that that have prepared me. I taught my first session of the Economic Development Institute right before my accident in 1994. And again, that knowledge feeds into the ability to withstand a very adverse event, but it also gives you passion and purpose. And you don't have to almost die twice to find your purpose and find your passion. And it's a cliche, but doing what you love is the greatest gift. And finding that. And I read a book when I was in fact, I wasn't even able to hold the book up. I had a little device that I could turn the page, but I couldn't hold the book up. And it's a tiny book.
Yeah.
And it's called Celestine Prophecy. You've probably heard of it, James Redfield. And what that book really says, it's a story, but it has some really deep lessons and principles embedded in the story. And one of those is to be open. Open yourself up to the universe. Look for things that you feel you might be passionate about, and they'll come to you. They will appear. And I'm a believer in manifestation, and I'm a believer certainly in karma. And you do good for people, and good things will come back to you. And be open. Look constantly look for opportunities. Because that's how you find them. And these opportunities can change the trajectory of your life. They can make your life intensely rich. And, if there's a final piece of advice from me, it's that. And you can accomplish incredible things. If someone had told me when I graduated from high school in this tiny town in rural Louisiana that I would have been able to do all the things that I've been able to do and accomplish, I would have said, "What are you smoking?" Because I want some of it. Remember, Dave, I graduated in 1978, so that would be an appropriate term.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But it's all about one thing. It's about being aware and looking for opportunities to find your passion. And being resilient, being able to withstand whatever life throws at you along the way.
Yeah,
if there's anything that I could leave the audience with, it's that. Because I've had an incredible life in many ways, not all of them great, but certainly would not have not opened up possibilities in my own mind. That's where it all starts.
Yeah, fantastic, David. Well, thanks for leaving my audience with that food for thought. And the ISRC is at the heart of what you're doing right now. So could you tell my listeners where they can find out more information about the organization?
Absolutely. The website tells the story. And the website is www.isrc, the letters, the abbreviation, ISRC-PPP, Public-Private Partnership. So it's www.isrc-ppp.org. We're a nonprofit, so we're a .org. Yeah. Excellent. I'd love for people to visit the website and learn more about what we're doing.
Yeah, well, if anyone's listening now, if you've once you finish and you want to refer to the website again, it will be on the show notes, so you can always go back to the show notes and just click on the link there as well. So it will be there. But David, it's been great for you to come on the show and share not only your story, but there's obviously very good tips for what's going on in the world, and resilience and adaptation in particular. Those two work hand in hand, and given a wealth of information for my audience today. So thanks a lot for coming on the show and sharing this.
My real pleasure, Dave. Thank you so much.